The massive projected budget deficit isn't stopping some lawmakers from going ahead with their pet projects paid for by you, the taxpayer. At the latest Bond Commission meeting, Governor Jody Rell signed off on some of these so-called pet projects, which infuriated Rell's own Republican Party members. With the state credit card almost maxed out,
I move the approval of an allocation and bond authorization in the amount of $800,000.
today, the state essentially approved charging another $25 million to the state's credit card for projects, some of them pet projects, critics say, that taxpayers will ultimately be on the hook for.
Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Item is carried.
Projects like $600,000 of taxpayer money to build a new swimming pool for the YMCA in Brantford, and $200,000 of state money to clean up this old drive-in movie theater in Southington to make way for a park. That's right, $200,000 for an old movie theater in Southington.
Because the Speaker asked for it.
With the state facing a $6 billion deficit over the next 2 years, Republicans from within Rell's own party are lashing out at the governor for not doing enough to bring spending under control. Basically, Rell had the power today to nix those so-called pet projects, but didn't. The state's Republican Party chairman, Chris Healy, criticized Rell and lawmakers today in his online blog and wrote for them that today, Christmas came early. But the governor says she has had to say no to lots of projects.
This is just 2008 bond requests basically from legislators and from others.
Just not these.
I wish we didn't have any earmarks in there, but they are commitments that were made, that the Speaker had made and that I made to them. So I honored them through the end of this year. When we put together a bond package next year, it is my sincere hope that there is not one earmark in there for anyone.
And we're back with part 2 of our special coverage of Connecticut in crisis. Gentlemen, you heard the story about pet projects. Some people are pretty alarmed by this. One person told me that actually the money for the pool in Brantford is for a YMCA that hasn't even been built yet. So it's essentially like setting a torch to $600,000.
Well, and I don't know why we're giving all this money to private organizations. This is, it's public money, but we're handing it over to groups that are not public organizations, and it's a lot of money.
Keith.
It's kind of indicative of how the culture has not changed to what it has to yet. Everybody's very used to at the end of the year saying, hey, I got mine. Leaders in the legislature go to Governor Rell because rank and file lawmakers go to them and say, my town needs a swimming pool, we have to fix a historic barn, I need a covered bridge here. And you get a lot of these small, they call them nickel and dime things. We're still talking about hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars.
Chris, I don't want to aid you here, but you've been covering the Capitol for a very long time. Would you say things have differed as far as what's on bonding, what's set on the agenda for bonding commissions versus, let's say, 20 years ago?
Well, you have to remember that the good times were not that long ago. People are not really geared up for these bad times. Only 2 years ago, literally, we had $1 billion surplus, $1 billion. The next year it was about 84 million. Okay, and now we're talking huge deficit after that. But only 2 years ago, 2 fiscal years ago, in the operating budget in the general fund, it was $1 billion surplus. So people are not really used to the fact that there's not going to be any money there.
Well, they need to get used to it. And I actually ran into Senator Meyer in the Senate chambers, and I asked him, he is the state senator behind the Brantford YMCA, and I asked him about using state monies to help pay for this. Let's go to tape, hear what he has to say. But what would you say to the devil's advocates who are saying, listen, we're facing a projected $6 billion budget deficit. All these projects need to get scrapped, for now at least.
Well, I think you need to look at each one individually. This one is good not just because of the quality of life it'll give, but also because of the jobs that will be employed in building that center. So,
Kevin, you're shaking your head. Do lawmakers need to come back to earth or what?
Look, state government, if it's a job machine, it's a job machine just for state government. And if they're going to ask people across Connecticut to sacrifice in the next few months, they need to make some sacrifices themselves that most of us don't think are really very difficult to make. And that is, stop all this vanity spending so that they can go home and walk around town saying, look what I brought you. people understand, look, it all comes from one place, and they need to really face up to it and stop this. And the governor, first and foremost, is the one who should have really put an end to it in this bond meeting.
And let's talk about the debt, guys. Let's explain this for folks so they can understand why this is so important. Because these projects are bonded. It's essentially put on the state credit card, and you pay an interest rate on that. And a good chunk of our current budget now is paying off our debt. How much? You want to take it? Go ahead.
No, it's over 10%. I mean, Keith has been following these figures pretty closely, but basically when you bond something, it essentially costs twice as much by the time you pay the whole thing, give or take. You know,
the mortgage of a house, everything goes to interest.
It basically costs twice as much by the time the smoke clears.
How much did we spend on credit?
Chris is correct. We're almost at 11%. I mean, we could throw numbers around. We have $17 billion basically on our credit card, but it means about 1 out of every $9 can't be spent on anything else because we're paying on that each year. Senator Meyer said you got to look at these projects individually, but at some point you've got to look at everything collectively. And we have a huge amount on the credit card. And one more thing, we need space on that because we're going to be borrowing huge chunks of money over the next couple of years so we don't have to raise it in taxes.
To deal with the budget deficit.
Right.
So we're going to be borrowing to pay off our current deficit.
And our
is that what
rating,
we think?
Our bond rating is terrible. It's among, there are very few states who have a worse bond rating than Connecticut.
Which in layman's terms means our credit rating's terrible.
Right. Our credit rating's terrible. So we have to pay a higher interest rate when we borrow. And in the last several months since this worldwide credit crisis, a lot of government entities, like the state of Connecticut, haven't been able to get people to buy their bonds.
So what can folks do at home who are watching this? What's some information? Writing your lawmakers? Does that help? I mean, there's a point where you feel a little helpless when you are dealing with something so huge. And in all fairness, the downturn in the economy did play a huge role in the current crisis that we're in. What else?
I think for a lot of people, what was interesting was in the last election, the race for president grabbed so much attention that surprisingly candidates for the General Assembly I thought were quizzed less than ever before on all the other issues. Voters just weren't really focused on that. I don't know that they're focused on it now.
Should they be?
Probably the main thing you can do is keep working and keep paying your taxes. The employment, which we haven't really talked much about unemployment here, obviously employment is the engine of the income tax. In round numbers, the income tax generates about $7.5 billion a year in round numbers. The sales tax, about $3.6 billion. Those are the big workhorses, and right after that, it falls way down to the corporate tax, which is only about $700 million. So it's the income tax and the sales tax that's basically doing the job. And the economy directly impacts both of those, and if both of those are hurt, we're in big trouble.
If the economy turns around, could things turn around?
Yes, absolutely.
It turns around slower and it drops fast. The income tax, because we benefit so much from wealthier residents down the Gold Coast, people who basically live with the stock market. When the stock market plunges, our income tax revenues can fall $800 million in one 12-month period. They just go boom. And I know we're throwing a lot of numbers around, but Chris pointed out, we'll round it up, $7.5, $8 billion. You lose $800 million. It's like 10% of your income tax, bang, in 1 year.
And anybody who's been investing lately with Bernie Madoff, they're not doing too good either.
There you go. I didn't, thank goodness. But I have other things to worry about.